Hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. I always like this time of year because I no longer feel guilty listening to Christmas music. It's okay, I'll admit, my little satellite. I guess some of y'all have satellite radio, which came with I didn't ask for it; it just came on my car, so I just keep it on. And those stations now start switching over to Christmas music earlier and earlier. I mean, it was way before Thanksgiving this year. And I was a little bit offended by that, but I also couldn't resist switching over and listening. So I confess, I've been listening to Christmas music for a couple of weeks, but now I can do it without any guilt. So I feel better about that. All right, we're going to keep marching forward on the topic that none of us truly understands. We talked about that last week, so I hope you all will grant me some grace because I'm not sure I understand this any better than any of you. And I'm not sure any of you understand this any better than me. Although what I love and have always loved about this class is the collective wisdom and collective experiences that you all bring to this. I learn from y'all. I don't come into this expecting to impart some unusual wisdom to you. Most of the time it works the other way around. So I hope you'll do that again today for me as we try to unravel this. Y'all help me remember, this is being videotaped because lots of folks are not able to be here and they want to see this. That's why I'm wearing this microphone. I got chided because I wandered from my restricted space last week. I think I went over to the screen to point out something to you and Ocean got mad at me. So that's why I put these chairs up here. If you see me wandering, just tell me to get back to the podium.
Now we know who's guarding.
Yeah. Okay, making sense of the Middle East. Once again, Paul and I have tried to divide this up sort of in our areas of strength, I think. So we're going to sort of pick up last week where we left off. I'm still, for now, kind of focused on the history, the culture, the geopolitical context into what's happening over there. Paul's going to handle a little bit more of the theological side. We're going to bring Scripture into this to the extent Scripture applies at all, but we're going to look at, starting next week probably, some Scriptures that apply, and Paul's going to handle the theological side. I'm going to handle more the cultural side. So let's pick up where we left last week. And I apologize. Because of what I said earlier, I learned from y'all's discussion, what your input into the class. And I felt a little bad because last week felt more like a lecture, and I'm sorry about that. Although I appreciate those of you that came up afterward. I was a little worried because I saw in some of your eyes that glassy look when I put up the 47th map of Israel. And sometimes jurors look at me that way after about 5 days in a trial and they're falling asleep. I know that look. But some of you, I appreciate, y'all came up and said you actually learned some things last week, and I'm thank you for saying that. So when we talk about the Middle East, let's remember we're kind of hyper-focused on one little country right there in the middle where the Star of David is. That's Israel is the land where the traditional land of Israel is sort of defined as the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. But the Middle East is much more than that, right? And you can see it extends, it's a huge area of the earth. A lot of it is, especially the Arabian Peninsula down there toward the bottom, is just so sandy and deserty, and there's just not a lot of human habitation. So you'll find most of the settlements around the sea and around the rivers, but that's what we call the Middle East. We're kind of in the middle of the Middle East. So we're going to pick up where a little focus now away from the land so much. I promise not so many maps today, but we're going to talk about the people. When we say Israelis, that seems to be the common term today for the people who inhabit the land and who are of Jewish descent, we tend to call them the Israelis. Although I will tell you, almost every one of these words is a loaded word. And by merely saying the word Israel to describe the country, because that's really what it is. I mean, the world, including the United States and the United Nations and lots of other countries, they respect the fact that Israel is a bona fide country, right? And we call it Israel. But to some Palestinians, merely saying that word makes them mad. Because to them, that area is something else. And they might prefer Palestine, right? An older word, which just refers to an area of land. Palestine was never a country. It was never a country recognized by anyone. It described an area. But to Palestinians, we shouldn't be surprised that they would prefer to use the word Palestine. But for our purposes today, I hope I don't offend anybody, I'm going to use the word Israel when we discuss that area because that is the country that is recognized today. And yes, the word Israel is associated with the Jewish side of this, but that's so be it. So let's talk a little bit about where did these people come from? This battle seems to be fought between two, we might say, ethnic groups, the Israelis, the Jews, and the Palestinians, most of whom are Arab ethnically or language-wise. But even those words mean different things to different people. Look at the first little bullet point up here. So if you listen to some of the Palestinian leaders today, and I'm talking about Yasser Arafat back in the day, you remember we talked about the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. That was sort of, think of it as the political party that had won the elections back in the 80s and the 90s. Some Palestinian leaders like Yasser Arafat would say, we trace our ancestry back to the original, what we read in the Bible as the Canaanites, okay? And those would be the people that were actually in this land before the Jews got there. So in that way, some Palestinians would say, well, one reason that land is our land is because, hey, we were there first, before Abraham, right? Before God promised that land to the Israelites. It's in dispute. I'm not here to give you a merit-based argument as to who has the better claim. I'm just telling you that is a claim that is still echoed today by some Palestinian leaders. Other Palestinian leaders, and apparently Hamas, and remember we talked last week that think of Hamas as a political party within the Palestinians, okay? Obviously, Hamas is a very militant political party. They espouse violence. It's in their charter. I'm not making this up. Now, you can read their charter. The charter calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, even if by violent means. Hamas, some of the modern Palestinian leaders, would point to Egypt, areas south of Israel, and even further south of that to the Arabian Peninsula that is now part of Saudi Arabia. They would say, well, that's where we came from. We're Arab people. We came from the desert. We came from the south and migrated up into Israel. Yes?
So do both of these groups have different languages?
I think they all speak Arabic today. Yeah, I think so. So third bullet point. No, listen, I'm not afraid to say I don't know. I've discovered that's a really good answer many times. I think I'm correct, Jerry, in saying at least today they all speak the same language, which is Arabic. Third bullet point, you've probably heard this, and it's also a disputed point, but some Christians and even some some Arab people, some Muslims. Of course, keep in mind now, an Arab is not necessarily a Muslim because Islam describes their religion, their faith. Not all Arabs are Muslim, not all Muslims are Arabs. But there's often connection between the two. Many Arabs do practice the Islamic faith. Some Christians and also some Muslims today would point back to Ishmael in the Old Testament as sort of their ancestor. Now, some Muslims, some Arabs would go one step back and say, Abraham is the common ancestor of all of us, right? We all descended from Abraham, Palestinians and Israelis, some would say that. Of course, we're familiar with the narrative that Ishmael was cast out, right? And that he and his race, and the Old Testament tells us that they sort of went to a different part of the Middle East, and he had 12 sons, and a nation was made from Ishmael's seed. Is that the same people that we would point to as Arabs today or Palestinians? I think that's a more complicated picture. Because I shouldn't have to say this to you, but there was a lot of intermarrying going on, right? We read about that in the Old Testament too. And at times the Jews were criticized for that intermarrying, right? But it did happen. Interestingly enough, there has been, I think this is in the next slides. Now it's another slide. We'll get to that here in a minute. They've actually done some DNA testing. We have that technology available to us today, and they've done some DNA testing of Jews and Arabs, and you might be surprised what they found. Jerry?
Can they, by any kind of paperwork or anything, trace their lineage back that way?
Paperwork didn't exist.
Well, I mean,
There's oral history. Yeah.
Way of writing down different things, and they go through their family.
No, I don't think that it's that good.
Since the
It's just
construction of the temple, I was told that the Jews can't tell who they really belong to.
I've not read anything that suggests that's an accurate. I mean, and think about why that would be. I mean, I'm 1/8 Cherokee. I think. That's the oral history that's been handed down in my family. I also am pretty sure that on my dad's side, the name Heffley was an old German word, Hoefle, Hoefle, I think. They came from Germany, through Ellis Island, through Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Arkansas, and then Texas. I'm pretty sure about that, Jerry. And I've gone back to the National Archives and actually looked up some data on our family and really tried to figure it out. And you can only go so far, even in the United States, which has good paperwork, right? And the trail just kind of ends. So I think one way to look at that is that if we can't even trace our own heritage very well past 3 or 4 generations, how in the world can we go back 80 generations or 100? The records just weren't that good. I see that all the time. If you look at, I'll give you an example. I do a little bit of property law, real estate law, not much. If you go back and look at old surveys and the way this land was plotted in Arkansas, you can really only go back about 150 years. And then what often happens is most of the farmers in this area, barbed wire fences, by the way, pasture fences are never on the property line. Never. Just trust me on that. And if you want to see a fight, what often happens is when Farmer A decides to sell his land to someone and Farmer B, as adjoining landowner, realizes the barbed wire fence is about 10 feet off, we got a problem. you may be familiar with the law of adverse possession. We sometimes call it acquiescence, which says after a period of time, usually 7 years, the fence line becomes the property line. Y'all familiar with that? Some of you are nodding your head. If you want to see a bitter fight to the death, get two adjoining landowners who can't agree on this. And I've represented a few. I won't go into a lot of detail with you, but one of my first clients I moved to Northwest Arkansas was a chicken farmer over in Oklahoma, and he and his neighbor got into a argument over the fence line, and a knife was pulled, and one of them ended up dead. And I said that to a lawyer friend of mine over in Tahlequah one day and told him that happened as if I thought that was a really interesting story. And he just kind of goes, oh yeah, that happens all the time. We're bad about that over here in Oklahoma. Yeah. y'all over a boundary line dispute? But that just an example of, Jerry, to your question, we don't have to go very far back in our country. We have good records now, but you only have to go back about 100 years, 150, and they just end.
On your story, it really depends on the judge you get in front of, because some people actually lose their land due to like marriages or whatever. And it's really not that person's land. And so that's a big fight.
I've seen that happen. Okay, back to where do these people come from? Most Israelis today, again, I'm using most because one thing I've discovered reading up on this, when I say Israelis think this, you understand how pluralistic their society is. So you've got, if you just walk around the streets of Jerusalem today, what you'll see is all kinds of people. You'll see a lot of Arabs walking around, by the way. There are a lot of Palestinians, I guess they're Palestinians, they wear traditional Arab dress. They're not Jews, but they're just walking around the streets of Jerusalem. They're not getting into fights. They're passing each other on the sidewalk. They may not be real friendly to each other, but they're just walking around, sharing the same street. Most Israelis today consider themselves descended from Abraham. Or maybe to be more accurate, Noah and Shem, because we know what happened in the flood, right? So some Jews who really do focus on their Old Testament history would say, well, yes, we can trace our history to Abraham. But truthfully, that kind of got reset with Noah and then Noah's son, Shem, after the flood. Something else we talked about last week, and I wanted to underscore this point. I think I made it sound as if there were no Jews for a while during, say, the Ottoman Empire. Remember, we talked about the Ottomans controlling that land for 400 years. And then you had about almost a century where the Muslims controlled the land, and there was no Jewish control. It doesn't mean there were no Jews there. There were always a group of Jewish folks who remained in the land. Even if you go to the Old Testament, we know that when they were carried off into exile, there were a few left behind, right? There were always some still there. So I think it's easy to infer, and history seems to point this out, that even though the Jews or the Israelites might not have been in political control of the land that they value so much, there were always settlers there. Okay. Third bullet point. Many Muslims do not consider to be descended from Abraham. Again, that's a lot of disparity within their own beliefs. Yet, if you read the Quran, Abraham is mentioned there. A lot of the Old Testament characters, including Jonah, by the way, which I thought was interesting. The story of Jonah is in the Quran, a little bit different twist on our normal fish story. But if you read the Quran, the Bible of the Islamic faith, you will find characters like Abraham and Isaac and Jonah. All right, a couple of other facts about the people. Here's what I was going to say. It's interesting to me that all this fighting going on between ethnic Jews and ethnic Arabs. If you look at them, just to be real scientific about it, DNA evidence has recently pointed to the fact they probably did come from a common ancestor. We all came from a common ancestor, right? If you believe the biblical account, the Genesis account, we all have a common ancestor if you go far enough back. But I thought it was interesting that our most advanced DNA evidence seems to support what all of us believe. We all came from the same place. And the folks that are there now really came from a common ancestor that maybe is not as much intermarrying as, our ancestors had to come from the Middle East, through Europe probably. If you're like me, you got a little Indian thrown in there. And so by the time you get to us today, it's a very complicated DNA picture. Anybody else, y'all had is it 23andMe, the DNA testing? Anyone done that? Any surprises, Paul?
I got a teeny bit of Jewish in me, less than 1%.
Ah.
Ashkenazi Jew.
Yeah. Yeah.
6%.
Yeah. Oh, are you going to say, Mike, you did a different one?
We did my heritage.
Yeah. Rod, did you do this too?
Well, I thought I was the one that ate Choctaw, but
No?
according to the ancestors.
Yeah. I'm kind of afraid to have it done because I kind of like saying I don't want that.
No, it's Scotland and England.
Yeah.
Probably 75 acres.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I get the sense that's true for a lot of us here. If you grew up in the South, your heritage is probably going to be British, German, with a little, maybe some American Indian thrown in somewhere. Yeah. All right. One thing Paul and I wanted to do for you, if you don't follow the news, just kind of let you know what's happening on the ground as of yesterday. There have been some interesting developments just in the last few days. Back on October 7th, you may remember there were 240 hostages. You hear, again, different words used. When I say hostages, and I don't think anyone disputes this, when Hamas attacked, and no one disputes they were the aggressor, on October 7th they did take Israelis back into Gaza and held them. And these were not combatants, they were not soldiers, they were just normal people, right? So they're considered hostages. And if you follow the news, you know about 240, or I think exactly 240 hostages were taken by Hamas and held. A ceasefire was declared a couple of days ago, and the idea was that bombing and shooting and hostilities would stop, I think, for 4 days. I think maybe we're on day 3. Is that right? And in return for the ceasefire, there would be some exchanges. Israel has been holding, they would not call them hostages because they would say they are combatants, right? They were Palestinians who either shot or bombed or something, and they took them as prisoners of war, right? Israel's holding a lot of them, apparently. So part of the agreement that has been brokered, I understand partly by the United States, is that there would be some exchange of hostages for prisoners. The plan, they're at the bottom of the first bullet point, is to exchange, ultimately to get to 50 hostages in return for 150 prisoners. So evidently, Israel is okay with releasing about a 3-to-1 ratio of prisoners to hostages. I don't know why, but that's apparently what they've agreed to. So the first exchange was 23 hostages Israeli hostages in return for 39 prisoners. I don't know, y'all probably saw some of the footage I saw. Some of the prisoners that I saw being released, these are Palestinian prisoners that Israel was holding somewhere. And they were sort of in a line, escorting all these prisoners out. They were kids. Did y'all see that? They were kids. They were teenagers. The group I saw couldn't have been more than 20 years old, maybe 25, which just broke my heart in a new way, that these kids are. Now, I have to assume they were arrested properly. They were doing something violent. They deserve to be held. I don't know. It just breaks my heart to see that kids that young are getting caught up in this, So initially 29 prisoners released from Gaza back to Israel in return for 39 hostages. Yesterday, a few more were released, so 39 more Palestinian prisoners were released in return for 17 Israeli hostages. Are we going to get to 50 or 150? I don't know. It's a very, very tenuous agreement. Both sides are constantly accusing the other of misdeeds that threaten to blow up the whole thing. We'll see. And I've also heard that Israel is saying after the 4-day ceasefire, bombing starts again. So, let's be thankful, I guess. We should be thankful that there's at least a 4-day pause. What happens after that? Who knows?
Can I interject for a second?
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon to have, I'm gonna use terrorist groups or whatever, Hamas, to have come back as young as 12 years old.
Yeah.
Or even younger, or 10-year-olds planting bombs in the ground.
Yeah.
So just, to people like, oh my gosh, why so young? For them, it is totally normal. They're already pre-programmed. I'm gonna use that, but that's their lifestyle. And so when we see a 17-year-old of one of us or 18-year-old that go off and like, oh, they're so young. Same like 12-year-old, you can hold an AK, know how to work it. Here you go.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon.
Yeah. I wasn't surprised by that. I guess it just made me sad. It's just a reminder to me of how young they start. Yeah. Somebody else had a comment. Yeah, Rod.
I'm having a hard time here trying to mesh. Are all people in the Middle East that we've been talking about, they wouldn't be considered Palestinian, would they? I mean, that's a movement more or less. That's a separate entity, but not a country.
Yeah.
But would everyone in those countries be considered? And Egypt is
No.
another interesting thing. It seems like to me Egypt should be included with the Middle East. And I know it's in Africa, but it's not really part of the Middle East, according to the map.
Really? I thought it was.
What?
Egypt.
Well, it didn't reflect that on the map.
It's northern Africa.
Northwestern part of, northeastern.
Yeah, I know where it is. I thought it was in the yellow. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it's well, that's a Muslim country, isn't it?
oh, I think so. Yeah. But back to your original question, the word Palestinian, there are Arab, again, Arab is sort of an ethnic word. There are Arab Muslim.
You created this.
I did. Rod, my impression is that, well, let's just look at the countries closest to Israel, close to the Star of David. In Lebanon, the country just north of Israel, my sense is it is predominantly Arab and Muslim, but I don't think they consider themselves Palestinian. My sense is Palestinian only refers to those folks within Israel who are Arab and predominantly Muslim and who believe they have a rightful claim to that land. I think that's only the people we're talking who are true Palestinian. That wouldn't describe Arabs from Egypt. It wouldn't describe people from Syria or Lebanon or, for example, Jordan, which is just across the Jordan River to the east of Israel. I think.
Wasn't it, didn't you say Iraq controlled the West Bank and Israel? are they Palestinian? And if so,
I,
then,
I don't think so.
so the people on the West Bank that live there, they're not Palestinian.
Oh, yes. No, that's the heart of the Palestinians.
But if Iraq controls the West Bank,
It's not Iraq. It's, you talking about today or in the past?
not today.
What's Israel?
I know it's in the framework of Israel there, but I was under the impression last week that it wasn't Israel that really ran things on the West Bank, because you had that in blue and everything was yellow.
Who runs, well, depends your definition of runs things. The political control within the West Bank is the Palestinian Authority. It's run by Palestinians today.
Okay, and that is within Israel.
It is. The Jordan River runs along the right side of it, and then it's a blob that we saw, much bigger than Gaza. All the Palestinians, for the biggest cluster of Palestinians are rounded up into two main areas. The West Bank, which is, area like 100 miles by maybe 40, and then a little bitty strip of Gaza, which is over here along the ocean, which is very small, very narrow, only 2 miles across and maybe 20 miles long.
But all the Palestinians are within the borders of Israel.
I think so. I think that's fair to say, yes. Yeah. Now, some Palestinian, like I said earlier, if you walk around, well, I'm going to show you some pictures here in a minute of what life is like in other cities in Israel.
I got one comment too, if you don't mind.
Go for it while I'm scrolling forward. I'm listening.
As we sound surprised here about the age of the individuals that were the combatants.
Yeah.
But the young obviously are much more influenceable, okay, than people that have more
Yeah.
wisdom. But I just looked it up again. The International Cult Studies Association demonstrated that actually in the early 20s, people in the early 20s are the most common cult joiners.
Not
So,
surprised.
I think there's
Yeah.
a point in time in which wisdom overcomes the youthful zeal. But remember, we ourselves in the United States actually take people in the military at age 18. Okay? So you have to, we think of this as children,
Yeah.
but they're not children.
Yeah.
They're trained and they're experienced actually to demonstrate that, and they have a zeal for that.
Yeah.
So, not saying they're a cult, but I'm saying just demonstrating
Hey, well, I'll share this with one thing I learned when we were over there. That's true. I think that's probably true for every civilized country. Most armies, those battles are fought by the young, right? That's who enlists. That's who's drafted. In Israel, that's not necessarily true. I was reminded, and I saw this. Everyone in Israel has to do military duty. Now, I think your requirement is when you're young. I think it's actually part of your college years. So every kid in Israel, regardless of whether you're in college or not going to college or whatever, you have to do your military duty, which I think is 2 years. You have to do it. It's like everyone's drafted. And we saw it walking around in Jerusalem. I regularly saw young people, about the age of my kids in their 20s, walking around in fatigues. And, these were professional-looking people, okay? These were not, how can I say this? These were not kids who had been, these kids were educated. They had other options in life. They were going to go to graduate school, all right? They were going to be professionals. But they were doing their military duty. I heard some Israeli was commenting, I don't know where I heard this, maybe on a podcast. Right after October 7th, they called up, their version of the National Guard. Everybody does your military duty at around age 20, 22, and then you go on with your life. But if you get called up, right, like we do in the National Guard, it's time to go. Well, after October 7th, I heard somebody saying, you Americans don't fully appreciate the impact this is having on Israeli life. Our professionals, our college professors, our doctors, our lawyers, our truck drivers are all being called up. Like 300,000 of them being called up. Now, they weren't, just suddenly drafted. They had done their military duty back when they were 20s. But they had an assignment, they had special training. Some carried guns, some carried computers. But it was a huge mobilization. And not just young people, not the Israeli military. They called up a wider range of people, and of course, way more than the Palestinians are able to muster. If Israel, this is me talking now, if Israel wanted to wipe Hamas off the map, they could do it right now. But they're getting a lot of pressure from other countries just to do it humanely, protect civilians, don't bomb hospitals. They've got to keep that in mind too. But I can tell you this, it was unmistakable walking around the streets of Jerusalem. Israeli society, and Silas mentioned this to me because he's been over there like 12 times. And he said, one thing you get the sense when you walk around in Israel is that everybody there is on edge and ready. They are prepared at a moment's notice to spring into action if they need to. That's just not, we leave the fighting to our young kids who choose to, we don't have a draft anymore, right? So kids who choose to go into the Army, we let them do our fighting for us here in this country, thankfully. God bless them. In Israel, everybody has to be trained. And when it's time to go, like it was back on October 7th, let's go. Jerry, what are you going to say?
We look at, I looked at an article yesterday that talked about the brutality of what Hamas did, cutting people open, ripping babies out, killing them, raping, all this kind of stuff. We look at it and I'm just like, wow. And then I stop and I think, the Syrians have been doing this for years when they were in power. The Babylonians have been doing it. They were, I'm not saying it's right, but for these people over there, this is normal culture for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's really sad.
You pulled a Peggy on me, and you stole my Peggy. You've trained these people too well. You make a very good point, Jerry, that I'm going to make here in just a minute. Couple of words we talked a little bit about last week, some vocabulary. Just want to throw a couple other words out there that you may hear. Diaspora is an old word. It's been around a long time, but generally refers to the scattering, the dispersion of Jews really throughout the whole world. Because, we talked about for 1,000 years or more, the Jews did not have a homeland, right? Israel didn't exist. It does now. But until 1948, and for centuries before that, it didn't. So where were the Jews? Well, they were scattered all over Europe and Russia. And then you get to the 19th century, a lot of them came here to the United States. So that word diaspora that you may hear thrown around simply refers to the fact that the Jews without a homeland, and honestly, I read this somewhere, not all Jews want to go back. Some Jews are feel drawn back to their homeland, right? It's like, Abraham, this is our land. And the Zionist movement that we talked about is that effort. Some Jews want to get back. I can understand that. I get the same feeling when I go over to Mount Judy in Newton County, Arkansas. And I walk around there and I see all this beautiful land, and I think my dad was born down the street, and it's like, this is my land, right? This is Heffley land. Well, not really. But you do feel kind of an attachment to it because you know that your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. I know the story about my great-grandfather who shot the nose off of a Union soldier. I don't know if that happened or not, but that's a great story. I drive down the road, Mount Judas, I wonder what bluff he was standing on when he shot that guy. But that's sort of become part of me. And I get that feeling when I go back over to Mount Judy. Well, I think the Jews feel that way times 1,000, right, when they go back to Israel. But not all Jews feel that way. Some Jews are just don't have that attachment. So they have scattered literally throughout the whole world. And that's what we call the diaspora, which, by the way, you read about in the Old Testament, right? It's not a new thing. The Jews got exiled. That's what, just another word for diaspora, even 3,000 years ago. Another word you may hear a lot about on TV, the two-state solution, simply refers to the idea that let's give the Palestinians their own land somewhere. Maybe it's the West Bank, Rod. When they talk about the two-state solution, it seems like that area we now call the West Bank of the Jordan River is the one they refer to as, let's just give them a country, right? Let's give them some land, let them self-determine, let them have elections, let them be a country. Some Jews are in favor of this two-state solution. We might say more liberal-minded Jews. Some Jews would say, over my dead body, are we going to give them any land? Because that's our land. But when you hear the word two-state solution, it simply refers to the creation of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state, just like Israel, probably alongside those two countries. If they ever made a Palestinian state, it would almost have to be touching Israel somewhere, probably along the Jordan River.
I just Googled all this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, why wouldn't you?
It says, the state of Palestine, it has a little over 5 million Palestinians, but that's only a fraction of what is in the world. There's about 20 countries, including the United States. The United States claims
Yeah.
250,000 Palestinians.
Yeah.
But some countries like Germany have many more.
Yeah, you can immigrate.
It's just like, kind of like the Jews, you know, they're
Yeah.
scattered all over the place.
Yeah.
And Palestinians seem to be kind of in the same boat. They're just all over.
I think if you don't live, what's a little unclear to me, Rod, is how much the Israeli military, because they do control the borders around those two things, the West Bank and Gaza. They do let people come and go, but I read a lot about they're not very consistent about who gets to come and go. Now, Palestinians who live just in Israel, and many do, because I saw them walking around, they can get a passport and immigrate and get a green card or whatever and just go live wherever they want to, I guess.
I think Iraq was the wrong country. I was thinking of Jordan.
Yes, I meant to ask you if you meant Jordan. There was and I didn't know this till I went over there. That whole West Bank area, oddly, was controlled by Jordan for a while after World War II. Yeah. Yeah, oh, it is. It is. Okay, Jerry brought up this point, you know, we seem very, very focused on what happens over there in Israel, right? When October 7th happened, it was big news. And we as Americans were really focused, the world was. There is a good question to be asked, and Jerry touched on this just now. Why are we so hyper-focused on what's going on there? It's not like there aren't other wars going on. It's not like there aren't other people dying. It's not like there aren't babies being killed and women being raped in other horrible conflicts around the world. So I just want to give you some context, just some perspective, because I got to show you more maps, okay? I mean, you haven't had enough maps today, so let's go. If you just want to look at this year, the area in red shows parts of the world that are actively at war in some way. Of course, now a big chunk of that is Russia because of the Ukrainian conflict, right? But if you look to see where the hot spots around the world, you see a whole lot of northern Africa. You see an area, you know, Eastern Europe toward Russia. You see India, Pakistan, and you see a little clump there of South America. Somebody have to remind me what country that is. I'm sorry? Maybe it is. So it's not like this is the only war going on. Now, I'm gonna highlight this for you. So this is, the title of this is, and I'm gonna stop right here, I promise. Conflict deaths. How many people have died in wars around the world from 2015 to 2020. The first graph over on the left is 2015, and then you go all the way across to 2020. And I'll highlight some of these numbers for you. If you just look at the first three, so in 2015, all around the world, if you add all the deaths that were occurring in wars, just everywhere, you can see 179,000, 2016, 150, 2017, it's getting a little better, 139,000. But look at the countries where all these deaths were occurring. None of them are Israel. None of them are Palestine. I see Syria, that's just up the road, right? But you'll see that wars are going on around the world and people are dying to the tune of over 100,000 every year in areas that, frankly, dare I say, we don't care much about. Here's the last 3 years, 2018, 2019, 2020. The good news is the overall deaths, I guess, were going down up until 2020. But you can see that they are in places that this is not on the news every night, right? What's happening in Thailand or Nigeria or Pakistan or the Congo. I mean, I have a vague recollection of hearing these things on the news occasionally, but it's not like every night, right?
The sad thing is, this is only what's recorded. There's
Yes.
a lot that goes on, especially like where Veronica came from and all of that, Central America. There's a lot of wars going on there that's not nothing but gang turf wars, basically.
And and Jerry, that's a great point. For the same reason that genealogies are hard to track because the paperwork's not very good, counting dead bodies is also not well done. Because both sides, have a real motivation to raise it or lower it. Here's another way to look at the current major wars going on elsewhere in the world. Today, Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, remember that? The war there started basically the same time the Israel-Palestinian conflict began, all the way back in 1948. And look how many people have died since then. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 people. In 2023 alone, there were 13,000 fatalities in that war, which is pretty close to what you see in the last box there, the last line in Israel and Palestine. That war has been going on, and there's skirmishes that happen every year since 1948. 40,000 people have died in Israel and Palestine. In 2023 alone, we've had a real spike, mostly because of what happened on October 7th and in the days since then. Look at what's happening in Ethiopia just since 2018. I had no idea the scale of this. And Jerry, this gets to your point. Depending on who's doing the counting, it might be 177,000 or it might be 600.
Well, there's a lot that's not even counted for. I mean, it just disappeared.
Here's some more. I had no idea 350,000 people had died in our neighbor, Mexico, just because of all the drug war fighting going on. In 2023 alone, 6,400 people have died in Mexico, next to our border. We are pretty familiar with what's happening in Ukraine, right? That's been on the news a lot. And look at the scale of that war, which started in 2014, but really intensified, more recently. And once again, 2023, how many people died? It might be 28,000, it might be 95, I don't know. Depends on who you listen to. North Africa, I don't even know where most of these countries are. Places like Burkina Faso, I've heard of that. Mali, Niger, Togo, Tunisia, but North Africa is a mess. And you can see since 2002, there are the numbers there. And then Sudan, I think, is also in North Africa. For some reason, we really care about what's going on in Israel. And so my question to you is why? Why are we as Americans and as Christians, why do we care so much about that war?
Political front.
What's that?
The political front.
The others aren't?
Politics. A lot of it's politics.
I would assume there's just as much politics going on in those other wars too. I just don't know what they are.
I don't know it so much. I mean, I do care, and I know Americans do care too, but I think back to when Ukraine, when it first started, the first thing that I thought of was all the children, the people that were not in the military that are being killed.
Right.
And
Right.
it's the same way now. So I don't
Yeah.
know that it's, that we care more for this, or it's just the same kind of caring.
What I wonder is, how much of this people in the United States truly care, and how much is being publicized to make it look
Yep.
like there's hundreds of thousands of people that actually care.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the Christian faith and Israel
Okay.
being part of our history, and that's like the root.
I-
And I think
Yeah.
it's important. I mean, if you choose sides, I'd be for Israel.
You can use that as a reason or an excuse, and that's true, but a lot of it has to do with how it's on the news.
How much it's on the news? Yes.
Because people
Yes.
care about what they know about. You can say to yourself, I don't know these countries even are. But we all have been drilled into our head about this particular environment. I'm saying it's right or wrong,
Right,
I'm saying
right.
that's why we care. That's probably the reason. Also, we use the excuse they're democracy, okay? The others don't appear to be democracies.
Right.
So,
Okay. I'm good with all. I think Rod's right. We care about Israel because we come here on Sundays and open our Bible and we read about it. Okay? I mean, it's back to Paul's loaded question. God chose, for whatever reason, the Jewish people to be His chosen people. Now, we can get into a whole discussion now. Are they still chosen? Paul made the point, I think it's rightly so, about the land. The land was chosen, in a sense, and given to them, right? Did they have a right to keep it for all time? Old Testament suggests otherwise, because there are specific scriptures that say, if you follow my ways, I will bless you in your land. And if you don't, you will forfeit the land, which seems to have happened throughout history. So I'm with Rod. I agree.
through history too.
What's that?
They reclaimed
Yes.
history too, Babylonians, the exiles, so the question seems to be, has God given Israel back this land? That's the point, and that's where the hot buttons get pushed, on all sides
Yeah.
of this issue.
That's the week you get to teach, Paul.
Yeah, that's next week.
Yeah.
Well, maybe next week. Let's see.
Several of those countries though that you're talking about, it's more of a civil war.
Yeah.
It is an actual war across taking over other territory though.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Philippines, that's all internal and it's guerrilla groups down below, you talk Africa, a lot of that is civil and it's hard to distinguish the side.
Yeah.
Because it is warlords or whatever, it really is. And, and then you look at the numbers, you don't even know how much more of that's famine on top of
Right.
what happens in Africa.
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
It's been going on so long and you don't know how to help to some degree. I mean, it's sad, but how do you help them? You don't know.
Yeah.
It just goes back that when you look at this Israeli thing though, Israel left Gaza alone. They stayed out of it because Hamas took over. And they've been working on tunnels and things for years and years. I mean, it's been suggested even 20 years because Israel did it. It maintained outside probably it shouldn't have as long as it did because it's very proven now. They have an intricate network of tunnels. They take in the supplies from the people, this group. And so it's
Yeah.
it's a little different in that they tried to stay away.
Yeah.
They tried to stay out of that thing.
I guess. I think I believe that narrative. But I want to go back to what Mike said. I started to give y'all I read a really interesting article a couple days ago. It's written by an AP reporter, the Associated Press, who worked in like the Jerusalem bureau of the AP. I'm not suggesting the AP is a trustworthy news organization. I'm just telling you it's a big one, right? It's been around a while. And she was making the point very much what Mike was saying, is that one reason we seem to care so much about what happens over there, she would say, just look at the way my employer staffs these wars. And she said something like, in the Israel Bureau, the Jerusalem Bureau of the AP, they have like 40 reporters. And then she listed some of these other wars, like Syria has been a hot spot. You don't have to go very far away from Israel to get other hot spots. They might send one reporter, one young one, and just, hey, if you find some news, let me know. So part of the reason I think we care is that news organizations tell us what we should care about. What's that?
We're programmed on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but we just need to be aware of it. We need to be aware that we care about what we consume. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of thoughts. And one thing's for sure, I hope that one thing y'all have got out of the last couple of weeks is we've been laser focused on October 7th, 2023, and rightfully so, because many civilians died. Folks who had no reason to die, children, women, true atrocities, because there's video to prove it, right? I've chosen not to watch any of that because it upsets me, but I know it's out there. There was a true attack that happened and that angered all of us. But it didn't start there, y'all. I hope what you've been able to, one thing I've tried to convey to you the last couple of weeks is there's a whole bunch of history before October 7th that has fueled the emotions of both sides, So was October 7th a flashpoint? No question, but it sure didn't start there. Sorry, no more maps. I do have to show you one map. I want to leave you with just a glimpse of what's going on. So we went over there in 2018. Here's a map of sort of the way it looks today. Rod, there's the West Bank we've been talking about in green. We got to visit some neat areas on our group trip, the Harding folks. So one area we went to is a city called Tiberias. You can just read that in your New Testament. It's right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. You can see, I can't walk over there and show you, but you can see right to the right of Tiberias is some blue. Just trust me, that's the Sea of Galilee. It's where the Jordan River starts. And then the Jordan River goes straight south and empties into the Dead Sea. In Tiberias, it looks like this. There was our hotel. This is in an Israeli-controlled area, okay? It's not in the West Bank. Israel owns, occupies, it's part of the country of Israel. Our hotel was on the left. Very modern, very nice, just like you'd see in our country. That's the Sea of Galilee. That field out in front is traditionally where they think Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. We don't know that, but we knew it was somewhere in this area. And so it's very green and very pastoral, very pretty. That little area on the bottom left is a ruins of a home where they are absolutely sure that's where Peter's mother lived. They're sure of it. And they built a whole glass thing above it so you can look down into the ruins of it. Bottom right was a neat boat trip we took out on the Sea of Galilee, which is not, it may be the size of Beaver Lake, maybe a little smaller. It was pretty amazing to go out in the middle of that lake at sunrise and think, I don't know where Jesus, his boat was, but he calmed the storm somewhere right around here. It was just Then we went to Nazareth. You can see Nazareth, also outside the West Bank, right? Jesus' hometown, just north of the West Bank. It's in an Israeli-controlled area, pretty modern. And one of the coolest things we did there is go to the Nazareth Church of Christ. I hope we can get, one of my goals is, Paul and I have talked about this, is to get either the preacher there, Maurice, or his son, who came over here to Lipscomb to do work, but has moved back there, to talk a little bit about what it's like living in Israel. Now, Nazareth is an interesting town. Nazareth is in an Israeli-controlled area, but it is a predominantly Palestinian town. Okay? There are some towns like that. Maurice, the preacher, and his son, Palestinian Christians. They are not Jews. They are Arabs, but they are Christians. And they aren't the only ones that live in Nazareth. Jericho. We've all heard Jericho. Jericho, look where Jericho is. We're now in the green, so we're in the West Bank, right? We are in a Palestinian-controlled area. When we drove to Jericho, we came upon this tourist trap called the Mount of Temptation because somebody decided that this is the mountain likely where Jesus was tempted. Okay, whatever. There it is on the left. There's a monastery up there. It's been there for hundreds of years. If you look real closely, I can't get through there. If you look at the left corner of the brown sign, you may not read it, but it says Palestinian National Authority. So this is within the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority, they're the political group in control, and they have a group of tourism, Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Yeah, so the Palestinian authorities acting kind of like a state, and they have a tourism division. And one of the strangest things is, as we were walking up to the top of that mountain, Sarah got surrounded by these little Palestinian girls. And you see them there. And they just surrounded her, and she didn't quite know what to do. And they were going, hee hee, they're giggling, and they're going, hi, what's your name? Talk English to us, hee hee. My name's whatever, you know. And they were sweet as they can be. And after that happened, she said to our tour guides, like, what was that all about? She said, they do not see English speakers very often, and they don't see blonde-haired people. And they were immediately drawn to Sarah, just because she was clearly an American. Yeah.
Worked in Japan for 2 years. He's 6'2", and they visited all 47 prefectures the 2 years they were there. And one place they went, it was a school. There were several school groups. They were on a field trip, and they were supposed to go around and interview people. They flocked to Michael like he was. Obviously, he stands above everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he speaks Japanese, so that was surprising. So he could talk to them in Japanese
Yeah.
while they were interviewing him. But that's basically the same idea. They just ran to
Yeah.
him because he stood out.
Well, Sarah spoke no Arabic, and they didn't want to speak Arabic. They wanted to practice. What's one thing our tour guide said? They wanted to practice their English on her.
The same thing with these kids.
Yeah.
They would want to practice English too.
Interesting.
But you don't often see people that are 6'2",
Right.
like males,
Right.
in Japan.
Right.
And I'm talking about, you might see that in Tokyo or some of the other big cities, but you do not see that out in the
Really?
areas where they live.
Interesting.
I was 6'5".
Yeah, you stood out too. You stood up and down.
A couple of the cities, Bethlehem. I bet you've heard of that with Christmas coming up. Look at where Bethlehem is. It's in the West Bank, so we're still in the green. Look how close it is to Jerusalem. If you can see kind of in the little red circle there, you'll see Jerusalem. The drive, we stayed in Jerusalem for several nights. The drive from Jerusalem to Bethlehem was maybe 10 minutes down a freeway. Bethlehem is also kind of tourist trappy. They claim to have built this building on the right. It claims to be built over what they think is the manger, the traditional site of the birth of Christ. That building on the left is known as the Shepherd's Chapel, I think. It's just down the street from the big cathedral on the right. And traditionally, that is where the shepherds who were keeping watch in the field, apparently. They think that's where they were. And then, of course, anytime you have a historical site, you build a church on it. That's what they do in Israel. Here's my last, we talked about this earlier, I'll leave you with this. Kind of goes back to what Mike said. Be careful what news you consume about what's going on over there. Just in my little preparation for this, I've found I've got to be really careful the maps I choose, the articles I read, Look to see who's writing them. Look to see if you can get a sense of what's their objective. Why are they writing from this perspective? I'm not telling you not to trust them. I'm just telling you to be wary, because there's so much information out there that's being written with an angle for a purpose other than to just convey what the facts really are.
Like the idea that the Israelis are being mean by only taking 50 hostages and giving 150 prisoners. Literally, they're trying to spin that as it's the Israelis who are doing something wrong.
Right. And it's when we're 3,000 miles away and they get to choose the photographs that we see, it's easy to spin it.
Or what you eat.
Be careful what you eat. See you next week.